right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to the evening tonight, and thank you all for spending the time with us. My name is Tara Catanzano, and I'm very excited to present the first in our inaugural series from a grant on faculty development for mid-career faculty. And I'm delighted this evening to have Dr. Geraldine McGinty to speak to us about negotiation and getting what you need. I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview about what the grant is all about. This grant is titled, Where's Waldo? Helping Mid-Career Faculty Stand Out from the Crowd. It is supported by the R&E Venture Grant from the AUR, and the three PIs are myself, Tara Catanzano, my friends Jessica Robbins and Puneet Bhargava. So the purpose of this grant was really born out of a recognition that there is a dearth of opportunity out there in terms of faculty development for the mid-career faculty. We recognize that we have created some great opportunities for junior faculty or early career faculty, but there really isn't a lot out there for mid-career. And so the purpose of this grant really was to develop and implement a curriculum for career development targeting that specific group of mid-career faculty. The way that we intend to do this is through a variety of different resources. The first, which is this, is the webinar series. There's going to be a total of about 12 webinars occurring monthly, and this is open to all AUR members. It's going to cover a variety of topics that we as the PIs felt were important for the mid-career faculty to explore, to get exposure to, and to really learn about as they're progressing through their career. We're also curating a reading list of books and journal articles and articles from the Harvard Business Review that we think are germane to personal and faculty development. It's really important to work on yourself and self-growth to be part of this development for yourself. We're curating a list of YouTube videos on a variety of productivity topics that will be everything from how to use Excel effectively to how to use time blocking to make yourself more productive. So that will be curated on the website. And all of that is open to all AUR members. Then we're going to do a small group development program, which will be by an application process that will be centralized through the AUR. And this is going to involve all of what we've just discussed, in addition to some shared Coursera coursework. And if you haven't seen Coursera, go to Coursera.com. It's a fantastic repository of different courses on a variety of topics, everything from entrepreneurship to how to give a presentation. And we will find a course that will be shared amongst all the people. We're also going to provide some group peer mentoring on everything from research and writing to looking at your CV and finding the personal gaps that you have in your CV and help you fill in where you have some gaps for yourself. There's also going to be a virtual journal club. So that's a summary of what we're hoping to accomplish with the resources from this grant. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Geraldine McGinty, who did her really needs no introduction, but did her medical training at the National University in Ireland before coming to the United States for her residency at the University of Pittsburgh, where she was the chief resident. Her fellowship was in women's imaging at the Massachusetts General Hospital. While working at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, she completed her MBA at Columbia University. She is an internationally recognized expert in imaging economics. She has served as an advisor to the CPT editorial panel, the JCO, and the National Quality Forum. She was chair of the American College of Radiology's Commission on Economics and was the radiology member to the AMA's Relative Value Update Committee from 2012 to 2016. In May of 2018, she was elected as the chair of the ACR's Board of Chancellors, which was amazingly the first woman to hold this office. Until 2013, she was managing partner of a 70-physician multi-specialty medical group on Long Island. Then in 2014, she joined the faculty at Weill Cornell Medicine in New York City. In her practice there, she serves as the Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Contracting Officer. And most recently, and congratulations to her, she has been named the Senior Dean for Operations at the institution. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. McGinty for this fabulous talk.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Tara, and kudos to you and Jessica and Puneet for putting this series together, and also to the AUR for funding it. So let me just bring up my slides. And thanks to everyone for joining this evening. And obviously, I know this is being recorded. So hopefully this is something that's really going to help you think about a toolkit that you can bring to some of those more difficult conversations that we have, honestly, throughout our careers. And happy to explore some of even the more recent conversations I've had to have with my new position. So a couple of disclosures, none of which I think is particularly pertinent to this evening's talk. So negotiations, I think, is one of those things that many of us recoil from. It feels uncomfortable. It feels scary. It feels just like something that, we'd rather do anything else than get into negotiations. But I would urge us to start by really expanding our idea of when we are negotiating. It's really not just about your salary, although for many of us, that is a critically important conversation and potentially one of the most difficult. And we're going to talk about, certain members of our community for whom it's possibly even more difficult. But for those of you who are already division directors or program directors, you know that it's very importantly about schedule and vacation and assignments and productivity. I know we have a couple of leaders. We have Dr. Reed Dunnick is here, and I'm sure Dr. Dunnick is going to be able to give us some great insights in the Q&A about managing some of those questions and those conversations. For those of you who are in private practice, it's about your business agreements, or perhaps even if you're involved in negotiating for new equipment purchases in your academic practices. And really the way that I started getting involved in negotiations was through, in my private practice, being involved in negotiating our payment rates with commercial insurance companies. But, even in your day-to-day life, in your home life, it's about getting your kids to eat their vegetables, getting your spouse to help with more of the housework. There are countless ways in which we are negotiating. And of course, then there's also purchases problems, getting a better table at a restaurant, getting the airline to listen to you when they haven't provided you the service that you need. And how do we approach all of those with a more effective toolkit and without some of that sense of stress and just dislike? Now, my journey into negotiations starts when I went to business school. And as Tara said, and I'm sorry for the background noises, Tara said, I did my MBA when I was a relatively junior faculty at Montefiore. And I had been very fortunate to be given a pretty big operational role almost straight out of my fellowship. I was asked to develop first one imaging center and then a network of imaging centers. And it became pretty clear that, I didn't necessarily have the toolkit that I needed to support that growth. I mean, I had taught myself Excel, and most of my decisions were being made sort of on a combination of passion and energy. And in doing my MBA, my favorite course was taught by this professor, Stuart Diamond, who's based mostly at Wharton, but has negotiated for governments, has negotiated for companies, and is really an expert in the field. And his approach is called Getting More, and I will make no apologies for working liberally from it, but want to give him huge credit. And I teach now in a healthcare MBA that we have at Weill Cornell, and I was fortunate to be able to ask Stuart to come and teach our students. So very nice to be able to pay that forward. And this idea of getting more is that rather than saying that we're fighting over something, and if I get more, you get less, or there's, that sort of zero-sum game approach to negotiation, that we think about how we can make everyone walk away from the negotiation feeling like they've done well, feeling happy. And that's sometimes going to mean leaving something on the table. But I do think it starts with an important recognition that it's almost never the last time you will encounter the person on the other side of the table. You just never know. And even if it does turn out to be somebody you'll never see again, taking the approach that you might, I think, brings a different flavor to the discussion, and certainly, I think, prevents you from burning any bridges or having any nasty surprises. And our radiology community is small. And, I think well worth remembering that principle. So let's start with probably the most important one, which is preparation. And you might say, well, look, if I'm negotiating with my kids to eat their vegetables, I don't have any time to prepare for that. Or if, I get my schedule for next week and it's really not what I thought I had discussed with my division chief, or I don't have any time to prepare for that. And I would say any preparation is better than no preparation, even 5 minutes to collect yourself. And for me, sometimes when you've been handed something that seems very unacceptable, the first reaction is sort of an emotional one. Stuart would say, emotion is the enemy of effective negotiation. So even 5 minutes to collect yourself and say, what is it that I really need out of this discussion? What will feel good for me? How will I feel good coming away from this? Any preparation is better than no preparation. And then think about, what are my priorities? What's the most important thing for me? And if you have time, make a list. You've probably done this when it comes to buying a new car. You've probably done it when it comes to buying a house. What are the things that are important to me? And I hope you've done it when you've evaluated jobs. What are the things that are most important for me? What are and be very expansive about that, because if you're just going into the conversation saying, I need this salary, or I need this schedule, the chances that you're going to come away not feeling good are probably greater. Whereas if you start to think about, this is what I would like in terms of my academic time. This is what I am hoping to achieve in terms of my balance of teaching and research and clinical work, and put some kind of ranking on it, because inevitably there will be things that are easy for you to give that are valuable to the other party in the negotiation. And that way you have something to trade. Now, I'm going to spend more time on this in a future slide, but it is not enough to go to do the preparation for how you feel and what you're interested in and what's important to you. You absolutely have to take the time to do it for the other party. And, my negotiations now are typically with commercial insurance companies and for our physician organization. And I have people across the table that I probably know. I've been working with them for many years now. I need to think about what have they been tasked with by their organization. These are mostly publicly traded companies, so they are to a large extent tasked with creating shareholder value, but they're also tasked, in terms of their own role in the organization, with growing their business, or, coming back with certain results on how small an increase they're going to give us as physicians. And I have to think about what's informing them. What are the pressures on them? They're people like us. They have families, they have bills to pay. And if I don't get myself into their head a little bit, I'm not going to be as effective. It's really great. And specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about negotiations within academia. It's really good when you can have standards. Being able to understand what are the MGMA standards for your profession in your part of the country, that's really helpful. Things like understanding what your colleagues are being given in terms of academic time, or what the university, some of you will be in university systems like the University of California, where those salaries are public. As much as you can learn about standards, that's going to be helpful to you in making your case and being effective. And then I do think you have to think about this concept of a BATNA. So BATNA stands for your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What is going to make you say, no, this is a deal breaker for me? And if you're, thinking about a promotion and there's something that you find very important, so perhaps it's your research time and you're being told, look, here's the promotion, but you won't have that time anymore. You will potentially have to say, that's not going to work for me. But be very clear about those things. In terms of the cadence of your discussions, if there's something that's absolutely, a deal breaker for you, far better to get that out there at the front end of the negotiation than have people feel that they've invested time and effort and that now you're announcing something that they may well not be able to give you. And then I think that sort of, again, makes people walk away feeling like they didn't have a productive discussion. So Let's go back to this concept of standards, because this is a couple of slides that actually come from a real negotiation for an academic position outside of radiology. And the person that shared these with me, I think, did a truly excellent job of framing their case for the compensation package that they felt that they needed. So what they were able to show the person with whom they were negotiating was that they had looked at what was the relative cost, and there are plenty of publicly available sources that can show you this, of them coming to where this position was being offered versus where they were living now, so housing and all the other costs associated with it. What they also did, and this was an economy, a system where salary bands were made public, they were able to look at the bands for different salary and look at the projected sort of trajectory of salary that they were being offered. And then what they very importantly did was they showed where they were compared to another faculty member who was already in the system, who they were able to show that they felt that they were competitive with in terms of years of experience and publication records. So those kinds of standards take a lot of the emotion out, take a lot of the uncertainty out, and can definitely frame a productive conversation. So standards are always good. Let's also now go back to your analysis of the other party, because it's really important to think about the issue, the discussion from their point of view. So when you're negotiating with your chair, think about what it is that they're tasked with. What does success look like them for their department? What are they being asked to deliver for the organization? Or if you're in a private practice situation, and I see we have Ryan Lee, what are the metrics for success for the organization that your leader is being asked to deliver on? And, what do you think that, if you have a chair who has been very clear that they have been tasked with by the organization in terms of, say, reducing turnaround time, remember that that's going to be top of mind. That's keeping them up at night. And if you can come to them with, an ask, but also an offer that meets some of their needs, then you're more likely to come away with a successful outcome. Think about who it is that they answer to. So I'm dealing with people who are answering to, investors and Wall Street. You may have a different set of, or the person you're negotiating with may have a different set of stakeholders, but give some thought to who it is that they're answering to. They may think you're the most wonderful person in the world. They may want to give you a massive salary increase. They may want to give you the best schedule in the world, but to some extent, they're answering to all of your other colleagues. They're answering to, everyone has a boss. Even the Pope has a boss. So everyone has someone that's asking them for performance. Spend some time thinking about their style. Now, I know that that's difficult when you're coming into a new organization from outside, but again, we have a pretty small community in radiology. You probably know people who know the person you're negotiating with. But if you've been working in a department, and when we're talking about mid-career leaders, and I think that perhaps the problem that we're trying to address here with this program that Tara and Jessica and Puneet have set up is, how do you sort of accelerate yourself out of that mid-career band in your organization, so your chair? How do they like to communicate when they speak? What words do they use? When you really listen to them at the faculty meeting, don't be on your phone, don't be doing your email. What is it that they tell you that's important? So I've just in the last 2 weeks changed my working relationship at Weill Cornell. You heard Tara say I've just become Senior Associate Dean, and I am now reporting directly to our Dean. And we've worked together, but maybe more tangentially over the last number of years. I know from listening to him, and because I've had a strategy role from the organization, I've actually been very intentional about understanding his priorities and how I can help the organization translate those into how we resource efforts and how we actually measure our success. So I know the things that are important to him. I've also actually, for the MBA course I teach in, I've actually done some primary research looking at our leaders' values. So I've spent time asking him, How do you measure success in leadership? What are your personal values? And so I feel very fortunate that gets me off to a good start in terms of understanding how I am going to craft a successful working relationship for us. And then understand, what are their options? When you're negotiating for a new position, what are they? Is there someone else in the department that could do this as well as you? When you think about the schedule, is this a good time to hire? Do they have the ability to hire other people? So think about those things as in your preparation. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually execute on this. The first thing is it's normal to be nervous. It's especially when you're talking about your personal compensation or your personal schedule. And I will say that I have no problem going into a room and negotiating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars for my colleagues, because that's easy. They're excellent physicians and they deserve fair compensation. It's a very different ball game when it's myself. So I don't want to in any way underplay how difficult this can be. I've already said this. Be wary of assuming this is an end game. You never know when you are going to meet the people that are currently at the opposite side of the table again, especially in our community. And I think when I give the talk about transitioning into practice, and I'm sure many of you have given that talk to our trainees, if it doesn't go well, move on, be gracious, be polite, and be polite through your whole negotiation. Again, some of my toughest negotiations with payers, it's always collegial, it's always polite. There's no sense in insulting anyone, and it doesn't make for a good outcome. Be patient. It is never a good idea to be in a hurry, be obviously in a hurry. Now, believe me, sometimes we are. Sometimes we have to get something done. But giving a sense that you have time for this for you both parties to explore a positive solution is probably going to make for a better outcome. Story about the end of the Vietnam War and the negotiations that happened in Paris, which may be apocryphal, but Stuart told it, and he generally has good stories, which is that the American negotiation team rented hotel rooms. The Vietnamese negotiation team bought a house. A clear statement: we have all the time in the world to get to where we want to be with this negotiation. So it's typically good if you cannot be rushed. This is important. When you ask questions, so for example, and sometimes when I give this talk, we do some role playing. So you've asked about a different schedule, or you've said, I would like this. Often is much more positive when you can say, can you tell me what options are available for my schedule? Can you tell me what others have been offered in my position for this, in terms of, say, administrative support? Oh, why do you say that's not possible? Can you tell me some of the reasons why it's not possible, so we can potentially work around that? So questions are more effective than statements. And if you find yourself in a situation where things aren't necessarily going the right way, buy yourself some time by asking more questions. So have them with you. You can always ask more questions. And this one is something that, my husband and I have both sort of absorbed a lot of this. And does it come in yellow? So you're on the car lot and the salesman is pushing you to make a decision, and you don't want to make a decision. You're not sure if this is the right deal yet. Does it come in yellow? So keep the questions coming, but make sure you have them ready to go. I've already mentioned this. Emotion is the enemy of effective negotiation. And then absolutely critically important, don't tell lies. Don't tell people that you've been offered a position and you have an offer letter if you don't, because that's probably going to blow up in your face. Don't tell them that I can leave it at that, because I think it's clear. Don't lie. It's just worth noting that, especially in the salary negotiations, certainly in New York here, it's illegal for you to be asked what you were previously made. We know that those questions in the past have essentially widened the gender gap and the gap for people of color. So check where you're negotiating. So Let me just wrap up with some additional tools, and then we'll just talk about some specifics where negotiations can be a little bit more challenging. So can't say this enough. You never know when you're going to see people again. Really try to expand your list of priorities, what it is that you're hoping to gain from the negotiation. It's not always about money. Sometimes it is about, I just talked about the fact that, I'm moving my office, and, maybe I'm not getting quite as lovely a space as as I have had for the last number of years, but it's really important because it's in the right location. It gives me access to the right people that I need to be working with. So it's not, you really have to be thoughtful about, what it is that's going to contribute to your success. What do you do if the other party seems like they're being dishonest and is behaving badly? Well, sometimes you can call it out. Sometimes you can say, I'm concerned that you're not going to be able to deliver on this, or, that seems different than what I've heard in the past. It's challenging when there's a power dynamic, for sure, but go back to your principles. What is it that I'm interested in? How can I make this as successful as possible? What are the things I can lock in that I'm using standards I know I can trust? And again, what is my alternative? Always good to spend a little time after negotiation to see what you think went well. How did you think you did? What might you have changed? What did you learn? That's a critical one, especially if you're looking to stay in the same organization. Now, we are not going to talk about some of the cultural differences. If you find yourself negotiating outside, and you may well end up doing this, perhaps you join an international committee, and now you have to think about how you're going to apportion authorship on a paper, and you're dealing with people who are in different systems, with different cultural norms than you. That said, I would balance some sensitivity towards those cultural norms with making assumptions. There are some not so effective and not so helpful stereotypes that I think we sometimes see applied. So be thoughtful and recognize that there can be differences, and you can read lots of articles on where you might see some opportunities to make your negotiation be more successful. Certainly, we do hear that in America, where we feel like we're quite transparent. We like to rely on written agreements. We feel very bound to honor those. That isn't necessarily always the case. It doesn't mean that the people who've got different cultural norms are bad people, and we shouldn't assume that. Now, this is an article that was written in the Harvard Business Review about how women could be more effective in negotiations. And I'm not going to show you the cover because I'm quite ambivalent about it. We know that women, there is a gender pay gap. Radiology may, depending on which study you read, be a little bit less prone to that. But we also know that women tend to be penalized for negotiating. It's that, we're sitting on that tiny pin where we're not entrepreneurial, we're aggressive, we're not, leaderly, we are bossy. And women are more likely to be lied to in negotiations, and that's not pleasant, but it's out there. So some of the strategies that they suggested was that women should try to be not threatening and present themselves as how they are contributing to the team, not necessarily just asking for something for themselves. And they should be very thoughtful about verifying claims and using standards. I'll definitely agree with the third one. Everyone should do that. Sounds like women need to do it more. Obviously, I think we have an obligation, certainly as leaders in the profession. I have felt an obligation that we need to address things like the gender pay gap and more diversity in healthcare leadership, which is something that's very important to me and something I'm, continue to work very hard on. Means that perhaps we can mitigate some of the need for women to do this dance around trying to be paid as much as their male colleagues for the same work. But I think that it is incumbent on us as leaders, and I think it is also incumbent on those of you who are coming to the table to spend time preparing and be brave, not perfect. I like this quote. Sheryl Sandberg said it to Mark Zuckerberg when he was negotiating her salary at Facebook. I actually had a very similar conversation when negotiating my contracting job. where I did say to the person negotiating with me, you're going to pay me now to negotiate, the rates that all of our physicians get with insurance companies. You certainly couldn't have expected me to accept your first offer. And it's not always easy. And as I said, it's much easier for me to do it on behalf of my colleagues than to do it for myself, but, worth trying. Some of the things that are important, your network. We all need a robust professional network. And that's where you have people that you can go to ask about the style of the person you're negotiating with, or think about, you get answers to questions about standards. Women also need not just that broad professional network, they need a squad of people that they can perhaps practice that negotiation conversation with. This one's an unpleasant one to have to even bring up, which shows that as hard as it is for women of color and men of color, it's even harder. A lot more bias, a lot more sort of punishment for violating what are perceived to be norms, and typically just a wider pay gap. And that's something, again, as a leader, I feel that it's incumbent on those of us in leadership to make sure that radiology is an example of where we've done better. So I will leave it at that. I hope we can have a great discussion. I see some people who I know have been on both sides of the negotiating table when it comes to many of the issues in practice. So thanks all for your attention, and look forward to discussing this.
Thank you so much, Dr. McGinty. That was an amazing talk. I'll invite everybody who's on the call to put their questions into the chat. We already have one question for you, so I will read that to you. Please share your experience in addressing salary contracting issues not uncommon in the university setting.
I think pretty much what I said. So I think you start with understanding who you're negotiating with, understanding where there are norms, whatever you can find out about, which level of MGMA productivity your salaries are typically being set at, understanding, what else are you negotiating for? Because, it's typically in an academic setting, not just salary, it's schedule, it's academic time, it's administrative support. I'm happy to go a little deeper, but.
That's great, thank you. While others are putting their questions in, perhaps I'll ask a question. You talked about how emotion is really the enemy of your negotiation. And I think particularly for women, this is a bit of a challenge of how to manage their emotion, at least in the moment. Can you give some advice of what you tell people who tend to be a little bit emotive, perhaps, about their responses? How do you tell them to control their response, or what sorts of tactics can they use so that they can be effective in that process?
I think role playing is really helpful. And, you shouldn't be embarrassed about that. The President of the United States and all the candidates do debate prep. Find somebody who's going to push you. Who's gonna, when you say, I'd like to talk to you about my compensation, or I'd like to talk to you about my schedule, who says, well, we don't have any flexibility. And honestly, I've heard that you're leaving early, and, if your family responsibilities are going to prevent you from really contributing, I don't see how we can give you a more flexible schedule. That's going to be hard to hear, but when it's somebody who you can sort of do it a few times, then it's not going to feel as hard. And I hope none of you work in a place like that. I know I certainly don't. I'm very fortunate. But, practice is good. I think, having some responses that you've got close to hand, questions. Why do you say that? Can you tell me what the standards are? Can you tell me what the university standards are? So having those questions, so you can kind of, in the back of your mind, you're processing, but your mouth is coming out with questions that will just keep the conversation going. Because the worst thing in the world is that you are so flummoxed by something that doesn't go the right way for you, and or as you perceive it, that you drop the conversation, and then you probably feel even more intimidated going in the next time.
I think that's great advice. I think also there's a big role for emotional intelligence in some of that, understanding your own triggers and how you can control them once you get into those sorts of situations.
And I'm going to say, Tara, and I know we have some leaders on the call. being on the other side of that, you know, you're a leader and you've had a terrible day. You know, the dean's been saying, you know, what's happening with your research funding? And, oh, by the way, one of the trustees was here and they had a terrible experience in the department. And what are you going to do about that? And then, you know, you think you're doing the best you can for your faculty, and someone comes in and they're like, I don't like the fact that I have to do this on a Tuesday. Can you, and, you know, you as a chair, you have to, you know, resist the urge to say, are you kidding me? You have to take a breath and say, you know, and deal with it. So it's on both sides.
I think it's really interesting how, you know, we're talking about really trying to dampen down some of our emotional responses and employing our control. And yet we also are asking ourselves to really ramp up our empathy when we're trying to take the perspective of the other person and the other party. So can you talk a little bit about sort of those sometimes conflicting states that we're trying to achieve?
And you know, I think some of it's a balance, because for me, you know, I suppose I've focused for so much on where we want to be. But I think when you're sort of in that mid-career position and you're looking to accelerate, you have to be tactical. You know, if all those wonderful articles that say, you know, bring your authentic self to work, that's great. And I'm really, really looking forward to the day where we can all bring our authentic selves to work. But honestly, that's not where we are right now in many workplaces. Yeah, you know, we all sort of adjusted a lot during the pandemic, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be in a department where, you know, we were emotionally supported. But I know that's not ubiquitous, and I think that the prize I have my eyes on is more diverse healthcare leadership. And when we bring sort of a more diverse range of lived experiences, then I think we won't have such a disconnect between why am I feeling like I have to be tactical, and then when you get into leadership, why am I expected now to be incredibly empathetic when I feel like I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders? Yeah.
And again, I'll invite everybody who has a question to just put it in the chat for us. If I can go back to one of the questions you were mentioning about how it is illegal for you to be asked about prior salary. We all know that these things do happen, even though there are rules and regulations. I know that when I was a junior faculty looking for my first position, I was asked about if I was going to be planning to get married, to have a child. How do you really extricate yourself gracefully from those sorts of situations without recognizing that this, you know, may happen somewhere again down the line?
Without saying, could you give me the number for HR? Because I don't think you're supposed to ask me that.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was talking to one of my mentees just last week who's in the job search. And I said, look, I really hope nobody asked you this, but let's practice how you're going to address the question if it does come up. And, you know, I think where we came to was, you know, I am really committed to being the very best radiologist I can be and contributing to this practice. And I see myself able to do that, you know, whatever way my plans go with my family.
And how about the issue with the salary, if they ask you that? Because I think that's more likely in this group of the mid-career.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I am certainly not an expert in the state law. And I think that, you know, I think something along the lines of, I'm looking to make a salary that's competitive and commensurate with, you know, what you'd be paying anyone at my faculty level. I certainly aim to contribute at that, you know, at a high level.
That's great. Thank you.
We have had a question come in that is asking for you to discuss negotiating strategies when departmental compensation is not transparent and everyone negotiates individually.
Yeah, this is not an easy topic. I mean, the call I just got off before this was, you know, having these conversations at my own institution. How do we manage this when it seems like there are so many variables that go into compensation. There is, our schedules, there's our academic time, there's when we join the practice. There's no doubt that, we've had times when the job market has cycled. So does it feel, is it different if you came in when it was very tough to recruit? So the more you can find out, the better. And you can certainly argue that perhaps MGMA standards or Medscape standards are not necessarily going to be completely applicable to your own individual institution. And I would step back and say, I think that's where we have to, at a system, at an organized level, make sure that we minimize these things. But some of the things I might say would be, thank you very much. Can you tell me how salaries are typically structured in the department? And how should I understand this offer? Is it based on fellowship? Is it based on my years of experience? You can't 100% guarantee against finding out that somebody else is getting paid more than you. And unfortunately, as a woman or a person of color, that's a risk. I think that you can try and use standards. You can try and ask questions about how it's structured, and hope, that's as far as I can take it. And I know that's not necessarily what I would like to be able to say, but.
Do you think, having had experience in private practice, that there's a different approach to negotiation that you would take? Obviously, the end results are different for what you're trying to achieve with your negotiations, but would you still use the same approaches when things like academic time may not be of value in someone in private practice?
Yeah, I mean, when I was negotiating to join my private practice, I had my list. And actually, one of the things that was really important to me at that time was having time to do my ACR work. And that was not something that the practice had really experienced before. So, that was something that would have been a deal breaker for me, frankly. And so I brought it up early, and it was codified, and, and I had to take it quite far. We had a discussion. I got a generic offer letter. I said, oh, you must have just sent me your generic offer letter because I don't see the conversation that we had about my ACR time reflected in it. Oh, it's just done, it'll be fine. I said, I'd rather see it in there. I think and that's something where I think, certainly if you get into that situation where you're being told, oh, we don't typically like to put that into the offer letter. Well, the way I think about contracts is you write them and you want to never look at them again. Because if you negotiate them properly and everyone's clear on what you've discussed, then you never have to look at them again. So that's how I approach it. Let's just put it in there, and then we never have to think about it again. Now, there are some things, it's worth knowing what you can't negotiate. If you work in a big institution, you're not going to be able to negotiate your retirement benefits because those are, applied to the entire organization. You're not going to probably be able to negotiate when your health benefits start. Again, those are things that have to be sort of applied to the whole organization. So don't waste your time on something that they absolutely can't give you.
I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about your new role. I mean, lots of what we've talked about is sort of like coming into a new place and like, you can walk away, but I think it sounds like you've started this new role where you already are, and you may have crafted a little bit to get what you wanted, to do the things that you wanted in your career, which, I mean, maybe I'm thinking about it wrong, but it sounds like it's a little bit of a different negotiation.
Well, it's a different path than I may have thought I was on, because it's in the academic leadership, and it is also sort of a restructuring of our academic leadership. So it's a role that's been typically held by one of our chairs, and as anybody who's on the call who is a chair, I think there was a sense that having to ask one of our chairs to also take responsibility for clinical affairs in our very large institution, as well as leading their own department, was incredibly challenging. So our dean restructured the role. So a little bit of unknown territory for all of us. I think for me, some of the hardest negotiations I had to have were with myself, because what I had to say to myself was, in this new role where I really, need to again, when you're a first, and I've done this before, you feel a huge responsibility to knock it out of the park. So I'm somebody who likes to do a lot of interesting things, and I have some other board work that I've done. And I had to really honestly negotiate with myself to say, you're not going to be able to do that. And then other me would say, oh, you probably can. And then, so that was honestly the hardest thing, is managing my own time. So, and deciding where I wanted to put my effort and what my priorities were.
That's great, Dr. McGinty. Thank you for doing this. This is Puneet. I wanted to ask you a question about, some people are able to better manage up within an organization that they have been at a while, and others don't. Do you have any tips or suggestions or reading material that we can use to learn, so that without actually leaving your job and going elsewhere, you're able to maximize internal opportunities?
Yeah. Start with your organization strategy, because that's where they're going to tell you what's important to them. And if you're in an organization, I mean, when I was in private practice, I knew what our organization wanted, which was to allow us all to practice good radiology, to be successful in the community. If I had expected my private practice to be supportive of research, then I would have been disappointed. It wasn't that they didn't think research was important. They certainly, many of them supported, the R&E fund and the RSNA. So, but it wasn't what the practice was set up to achieve. So, look at the words, and listen to your leaders when they're talking, listen to your chair when they talk about what are the things that they want from you, because, you can use that not to be, obsequious and calculating, but if your chair says that they're looking to really increase the department's NIH funding or the department's academic productivity, if what you need has nothing to do with that, it's going to be hard to sell. Whereas if there's something that you can offer to support that, or if you can frame what you're looking to in terms of the organization's goals. So that's a place where I would start. I'd highly recommend Stuart's book, and this isn't sort of an advert for it, but I have found it very, very useful. What else? I mean, there's a lot of articles about, understanding what people's different styles are. You're not looking to get married to these people, but then again, some of our work relationships we do spend more time with than our families. So some of the writing, and then I can certainly share some of the things that I like to read about what people's different styles are. Ryan and I are doing Ryan Lee, who's in the audience, are doing a leadership program for the radiology community in Zambia. And so I just spent some time creating a talk on teams, and recognizing that there are people who are quieter, more introverted, people who are more extroverted. Really think about who it is that you're dealing with, and how do they like to negotiate. I saw a nice comment from Dr. Dunnick. Think about mutual gains. Absolutely portray, this is what we can achieve together. This is what will come out of this that will benefit not only me, but will benefit you.
One of the strategies that you discussed was to essentially debrief after your negotiation. And I imagine that most of the time this is another internal you1 versus you2. Have you ever debriefed with the person that you have negotiated with? Have you ever had that sort of relationship where you could have an open conversation about the negotiation from their perspective?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, we do it when we're doing negotiations with the payers. We do it all the time, because we start here and we need to come here, and every day we're okay. We think we've moved on this. We're not getting there. We're not getting where we need to go on this. How can we think differently? Have I ever had A situation where I've been able, I don't think I can remember one. I think that, no, I don't think I have, but it's a great idea. I think certainly if you felt like you had, and maybe it's in a more mundane day-to-day thing. Maybe it's when you've tried to negotiate something with your chair and it hasn't happened. When you have your next annual review with them, say, I thought that project was really great. I really wanted us to do that new MRI center in this place, or I was really interested in adding this service line or adding this piece of equipment, and it didn't really resonate with you. I mean, obviously, framing questions. Why was it that you didn't think that was going to contribute to our department's success? What did I miss about why that, about what that was going to mean for the department? So that might be a useful way to do it. And that's more, I think, in terms of a project than yourself.
Yeah, maybe this is a good question towards the end of the session. At what point do you stop negotiating? Like, you've had a couple of sessions and you haven't made a fair amount of progress, or maybe not to your satisfaction. At what point you can say, all right, this is it, no more negotiating, now it's time for some hard decisions?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstance. I mean, when you're looking at a new job, you may well be juggling different offers, and you do have to sometimes you just have to sort of do a score, on the things that are important to you. This one scores a 1 out of 3, this one scores a 3 out of 3, and or whatever tactic. And Puneet, you're one of my favorite productivity people, so I'm guessing you have some hacks on that. So at some point you're going to have to make a decision, and that's where you may not necessarily own that process, because there may be time constraints. You may have them, the institution may have them. I think that if you're thinking about perhaps a project that you're pitching, you'll have to at some point decide whether it's continues to be worth your time. In terms of your salary, I think that's where your best alternative, like, what is it that you can live with? And what you can live with, maybe you live with it and you stay. What you can live with, I hope, is going to be you were expansive, and if perhaps the salary wasn't what you needed, you've negotiated, academic time or administrative support, that you've managed to get some kind of win. Because if you've come away with nothing and you feel like you prepared and you feel like you did the work, then that's where you probably have to ask yourself, is this an organization where I'm valued? Is this an organization where I can succeed? And it's not always going to be, now I know that it's not always possible to move on. So if you find yourself in that situation where it really didn't go well, and you're perhaps not going to be able to move on, then I think you come to another Sheryl Sandbergism, which is, if option A isn't available, then, forgive my language, kick the shit out of option B. What can you do in this situation to make it work for you? There's another concept I like, which is job crafting. Comes from the Yale School of Management. How can I make this job into what I need it to be? And, is it forming relationships outside of the department? Is it getting on a committee so you're more visible, not in your own department, but helps elsewhere in the health system? Are there administrative roles that you could take on? Those are sort of contingencies. You hope you're not going to get there, but if you do, all is not lost.
I think that raises an interesting question. A lot of us are conditioned to think about things like money or salary or time off or academic time. What sorts of resources can our viewers look to think outside the box, and for things that, like job crafting, that probably some of us have never heard about until now? Where can they go to get some more information about this sort of thing and learn what other opportunities might make a job doable for them?
Well, we can certainly share the job crafting link, but I think things like this are incredibly important, and not just listening to the webinar, but starting to build community, using your professional organization to meet your peers, because those are the people that can talk to you about what is it that they're doing? How have they managed their negotiations? So this is incredibly important. I give you guys huge credit for setting this up.
Thank you.
Yeah, one little tip that I just I think found in a Harvard Review article was like when negotiating or just doing little asks that we're doing all the time with our colleagues, not big negotiations, but just small ones, is to use the word because. So if you're asking somebody to do something and you said, well, I'm asking because, and give your reason, apparently it gives a little bit more reason for people to say yes. And so I've been very mindful of doing that in my emails, even if it's like a switch for a clinical day or whatever, asking because I have this and this. I found that people are giving a little bit kinder replies to me, even if they said no.
I hope we're generally being kinder to ourselves after this pandemic and cutting each other more slack, but.
That works with parenting too. Tell your kids why.
Really, I haven't found that. Generally, they tell me what to do. But we're just about at the close of the hour. I do not see any more questions in the chat box. We would ask that people click on the link that is in the chat to give us some feedback about the webinars so that we can continue to bring this important programming to the members of the AUR. I'd like to thank the panelists and especially Dr. McGinty for sharing her wisdom. I think this has been incredible. I've learned a ton. I think it makes me very eager to go and read some more about negotiations and learn how we can move into those next bands of our careers. Any final thoughts from anyone?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for everyone's participation and for the great conversation this evening. I'm looking forward to more of these as we move forward.
Thank you. This is an exciting start.
Good night. Good luck with the rest of the series.
Thank you.
Thank you.